Hi, I'm Greg Schaefer, and welcome to the virtual CISO moment. Jake McCoy joins us today. He is the founder of Hire A Geek Online. Jake, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Greg, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So would love to hear your background, how and why you got started in this wonderful field of technology. I'm really interested in the why sometimes because, there's some days when I feel like I'm so stressed out and I think to myself, why did I get involved in this? I wanted to be a truck driver, but I can
Right.
still, yes. And just go through your career up to and including, I know you founded a couple of businesses. Always love talking to entrepreneurs. So tell us your story.
Sure. So I guess that the best start is a why, right? So the reason I got into technology in the first place, my mom got a computer for the first time for our house back in like the early 2000s. And I was curious on how it worked and how it functioned. So I instantly took apart the computer like the second day
Mhm.
of having it and fully broke it. Nothing would work or function at all. So my mom said, "You need to figure out how to fix this or you won't have a computer until after you graduate high school." So is back in the day with like IDE drives and ribbon cables, and I was pulling things out I shouldn't have pulled out, and I completely destroyed that computer. So didn't figure out how to make it function, but I got upset because I didn't know how to fix it. So then it spun me into this, let's figure out how technology works. I was super fascinated with it. Fast forward to graduating in 2006, I joined the United States military, and I wanted to still pursue through IT and technology all through high school. I did the same thing. I went to every technology class I could possibly get into and served my time in the military until 2009. And then I just continued down that IT path because I was doing everything hardware related. I got into software, then I got into the security side of both hardware and software. And now, spin up, 15, almost 16 years later, here I am. I own a business. I've done a lot of cybersecurity work for a lot of big companies and a lot of small to medium sized companies as well. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. To kind of wrap that up.
So in your business, in your time in the military, what branch were you in, and were you doing something technology related there?
Yeah, so I was in the Army National Guard and I was working for the Department of Defense. So my MOS was 25 Bravo back then. That was an information security specialist.
Ah,
And really all we did is we ran cables, swapped out hard drives, made sure that nothing was failing. But yeah, I spent my time with the Department of Defense while doing that.
so I always like to ask that question because as frequent listeners and viewers of the podcast know, I also was in the service. So thank you for your service, first of all. And I was not in technology. Well, I guess you could say it was technology, but I was an aircraft mechanic. It's a
Yeah.
different kind of technology.
Hmm.
But I always like to ask folks who transition from the military, is there anything from that life that you took with you as far as like skill set or mindset that helps you in your career today?
Yeah, so I mean, still to this day, like I said, you were in the military. Once again, also thank you for your service. But there's a saying in the military: if you're 15 minutes early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. So
Right.
I've taken that concept my entire life to where, I mean, even for this podcast, showing up 15 minutes early to something and make sure you're prepped and prepared. That mindset has never left me at all. And then I think another thing I take out of the military, kind of a funny thing I take out of the military, is watching movies and like watching someone try to hack into a government system, or they're trying to do something and like it's not even remotely close to what they're supposed to be doing. So I do take some joy out of that as well.
Yeah, I can't remember which movie it was. It might have been, I'm dating myself here, but it might have been Sneakers. But I know that there was one where like, they start to like do something against the IP address, and the IP address starts out with like 512 or something like that. I'm like, no, no,
Yeah,
no, 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 no.
yeah.
That is not the way it works. I don't know who your technical advisor was, but they should be fired. Of course, it could have been one of those things too, like in most movies and television shows for at least a half century. The phone number is always like a 555 number because that's a number that doesn't exist, a prefix that doesn't exist because people were
Yeah.
calling numbers. Sorry, Jenny, 867-867-5309.
5309. Yeah.
Yeah, Jenny. Well, so okay, now you're at Hire A Geek Online, and just briefly tell me, what do you do there? What
Sure.
is that all about?
Sure. So I'm the owner and founder of Hire A Geek Online. To give a little bit of backstory from where the business was created, I started the business back early 2002. I didn't do anything with it because I was working two security jobs at the time. So I had it registered, and it's been registered since 2002. But within the last year, January of 2024, I really started focusing on using that business more because of the issues I saw in small to medium sized businesses, which is what I focus and target the majority of the time. I saw a huge disruption between C-suite level employees and the IT department. They never communicate. I mean, you've been doing it
Mm-hmm.
much longer than I have, but
That's
it's
a nice way to say that I'm old, by the way.
well, I mean, yeah, right. So that, but like that was my whole thing was IT departments and CEOs, CFOs. They don't communicate properly together, which causes a huge gap in both technology and security. But I found a way that I'm able to take that information, tell a C-suite level employee why it's important, and then they'll be like, "Oh no, that's super important. We should implement that." Then I can talk to an IT department or your CTO, whoever is running it at that time, and go through and be like, "Hey, this is a process we need to follow. This is what's going to take to do that." And I build out a digital roadmap for small to medium sized businesses. And then I help implement that wherever I can. If it's software or if they need some type of different hardware, I'll go through the process and make sure that they're following the best practices.
So I love the fact that you're working with small, mid-sized businesses, and I think that actually probably originally when we connected on LinkedIn, it was in a small, mid-sized business discussion or thread or
Yep,
something like that, most
sure
likely,
was.
because that's 90% of the stuff that I think I talk about on there, and or post some funny stuff sometimes. But I love the perspective, and from your perspective and from your experience, to hear what you think are the most significant threats to small and mid-sized business information security.
Sure. So the biggest is still human error, right? Like every single day, it comes down to the people that are employed and if they're properly trained for the most part, right? The majority of the work that I do is just training people specifically on common attack vectors, right? So it could be anything. It could literally be anything to, hey, you shouldn't use the same email address for multiple accounts, this, that, or the other. Make sure that there's training involved. Make sure that you're using some type of security awareness. Also for your vendors, right? A big thing for me is both employees and third-party vendors are the biggest attack vectors for any small to medium-sized business because they just give them carte blanche access to everything. And since you're doing that and then you don't put any security policies in place, well, what if that third party vendor gets mad or upset because you didn't pay the bill, you canceled the contract, whatever the case may be, and now they have full access to your Microsoft servers. And that's not just a hypothetical. I've seen that multiple times. So it's like, oh yeah, that used to be a third party service we use, but you can remove their email accounts. Like, well, how long has it been since they haven't been a vendor of yours? Oh, 2 to 3 years. So they could have signed into any of your services for the last 2 to 3 years because you didn't go through and do the cleanup and make sure that that's taken care of. And anytime I run into that, they're always going to have problems with their employees as well. So those are always going to be biggest attack vectors. Software and hardware can change all the time. But if you don't train your staff and you don't have someone on your team to properly train them, it's a huge hassle. And those are the companies that are the ones that are getting hacked. 48% of small to medium sized businesses get hacked. So that's usually what it comes down to.
When we talk about third-party risk management, vendor risk management, I'm glad you brought that up because that is a big deal. And I've seen something similar where they don't offboard their vendors properly. Any tips for a small business or medium-sized business that you can provide to help facilitate that offboarding? Like what do they need to have in place as far as like processes, as far as like monitoring, for example, like you said, their email address will maybe put something in place to make sure that that address isn't being used. What kind of recommendations do you have?
Yeah, so my biggest thing is you always have to, especially for offboarding like a third party vendor or any person in your organization, is you have to have a process in place, right? You have to have documentation on what happens if you no longer have that employee, you no longer have that third party vendor. Those are very important to have. In most small to medium sized businesses, documentation is the last thing that they're ever worried about until something happens like, well, why didn't we have a process in place? Well, you didn't put one in place to begin with. So my biggest tip is always, hey, always have an offboarding documentation process. It doesn't matter if the third party or employee, make sure that you have it properly, aligned with what your goals are for your company, but also make sure it's like, hey, that third party vendor's email didn't stay on our server because we no longer have them as a vendor. Our IT department was told remove all access. Removing all access requires you to follow this procedure, which requires you to remove any emails from services that they had access to. And like I said, same thing for employees. If you have a process and you follow the process, you can save yourself a big headache.
And this really speaks to another importance. You can't protect what you don't know about. So how important, in your opinion, is having like a good information and systems inventory just to know where to check?
Yeah, it's huge. Anywhere I start with any company when I'm working on a roadmap for them, and I do those completely free of charge, but any roadmap that I do for them, I ask them, okay, how many current devices do you have in your environment? How many people are using those devices in your environment? Do you have a list of all the devices that are being used? And 9 times out of 10, it's no, we don't have any of that in place. And that's instantly a red flag to me. It's telling me that, hey, if you're not keeping track of the devices that are going to cost you thousands upon thousands of dollars every single year, then you are more than likely also don't have standard operating procedures, right? Which is something also I grabbed from the military. If you don't have SOPs in place, well, then you're not going to run and function properly. So that's how I always start. You have to have logs of any type of electronic that you have. If it connects to the internet, you need to know what it's connecting to, what it has access to, and all of that needs to be documented. Also from a SOC 2 level or from any security type level, you're supposed to know where your data is being stored and how it's being accessed. So it's very important.
And even from an insurance aspect, I know cyber insurance, it used to be just as simple. If you had liability insurance, you'd get a questionnaire that had like 10 questions on it. And probably half the times folks didn't read that anymore. But nowadays, because of all of the breaches and the threat of breaches and not wanting to pay out if an organization isn't doing some of these basic items. I mean, these are basic. What we're talking about here, these aren't like highly mature models of cybersecurity. They're basic things that you should be doing, kind of like having a cup of coffee in the morning, if you like that sort of stuff. In your, do you do any work with businesses helping them prepare or work with their cyber insurer, like filling out their much more extended questionnaires now?
Yes, I 100% do. My big thing with that is I always ask, hey, do you have cyber liability insurance? And they're like, well, maybe, I'm not sure. That is a 100% no, you don't have cyber liability insurance.
You know how much it costs.
You know exactly, because cyber liability insurance is not cheap by any means. It's probably the most expensive insurance you can get for a business outside of like healthcare. So cybersecurity insurance, anytime I work with a client and I ask them, hey, who's your insurance provider? And then I will get on the phone with their insurance provider and be like, hey, we noticed that we need to have cybersecurity insurance. Please send over all of your requirements for us to get that. And then I walk through with the client the entire process of, okay, your servers need to be updated because the operating system's out of date, or this, that, or the other. Your devices are too old. They won't cover you under insurance. We need to talk about phasing them out, have a phase out process for your older devices. But yes, I work with them all the time. And I also have insurance providers who reach out and recommend me specifically to go through the process to also check to make sure that that company is not falsifying any information or missing anything that will also cause that insurance provider to pay out a bigger premium.
And one of the other risks that you talked about too earlier was training, and I would agree. A lot of times in companies we have information security awareness training that is annual. It's like a 15-minute video. You check the box, you're done. And I don't think that there is a security practitioner out there that would say that that is effective outside of checking the box. But on the other hand, security training can be dry. It can be boring. It can be, we put in little tricks like, you can only you have to stay on one slide a certain amount of time. You have to listen to it. You know, all that sort of stuff. You have to attest to having done that.
Yeah.
But realistically, what's something that businesses can do to improve their information security and cybersecurity awareness training?
So my big thing, and it's maybe because I've worked with them exclusively before at one point, but KnowBe4 is probably the best security platform you can get, even for small to medium sized businesses. They're priced very competitively in regards to they base it on per seat or per user. And their training is not dry. If anything, it goes a little far into the corny side of things with videos and things of that nature. But they also make it to where you can gamify it, right? Everybody loves games. So with KnowBe4, which is what I suggest to and recommend to everybody, is you can go through the process and be like, oh, I have better security than, Jenny or Emma, who is currently, has like an 83%. I have a 73%. And then do rewards and incentives. I also do that for all. Be like, hey, if you really want them to make sure that they're secure, give them like a day off for like a month if they come like the top person in the security training for the month. Give them some type of incentive to do it. And then they'll take all that information in. But to just provide a document and be like, hey, read this document. These are our security policies. Follow them. No one's going to read more than 2 sentences of that. So make it engaging. Use KnowBe4. I'm, like I said, huge fan, huge believer in them. That the person who created it, no longer with us anymore, but knows how the security frameworks work. And they know what you need. And you don't have to choose a million different options. You can just be like, hey, I want them to be trained on phishing attacks. Okay, perfect. Here's an entire catalog of phishing attack videos, quizzes, and games that you can give them.
So first of all, I have to send a clip of that to KnowBe4 so that you can be reimbursed. That was a great commercial for him. And in complete transparency, my daytime job at vCISO Services, we are a KnowBe4 partner as well for a lot of the reasons that you say. And KnowBe4, in addition to a lot of the other platforms out there, there are a lot of excellent platforms out there. They have something else too, which is an integrated risk score. You kind of touched on that a little bit, but it will query outside of just the KnowBe4 environment to see if like that address, that email address, for example, was on a breach list somewhere. So there's a lot to be, that gives the person responsible for assigning training a better risk perspective of who to focus on and maybe what, because would you agree that the more effective training is where we focus on where the higher risks are?
Usually, so like I said, and that kind of depends on, like I said, I've seen C-suite level employees not care one way or the other, which, I mean, by all means, that they can do that if they want, right? They run the company, but at the same breath, they're also the most vulnerable in any company because they don't take those things seriously. And they kind of get a free pass, in my opinion. But big thing is, focusing on, you need to focus on your business functionality, right? So, and what I mean by that is if you're just running like a B2B shop and you don't have a website or you don't do anything online, you don't have to worry about learning about malicious scripting from like a website, right? Like, so that's also, once again, to tout KnowBe4 a little bit more, that's what I also like about them is you don't have to have those sections and make it feel overwhelming. So when someone signs in to look at their course catalog, they're like, why do I have 53 videos, but only 2 of them pertain to me, right? So yeah, I think it's very important that you need to focus on those core competencies, and then everybody will be like, oh, well, that's relevant to what I do, and take it more.
And that's another great point that you brought up too, with regards to the C-suite, and that for those SMBs that are, if you are a C-suite member, you set the example. And it's not just with security, with everything you do at the company, you know, that you set the example. And if you're not setting the example, you don't have to get like wildly excited about doing your information security training, but you should set the example of letting your entire staff understand why you think that it is appropriate and why you're doing it. If you don't do it, if you think that you don't need to do it, then
the rest of your company, they lead, like I said, it's a lead by example, right? You don't, as you mentioned, you don't have to be like, oh, this is super great, but at least support your like information technology department, which 9 times out of 10, like I said, it doesn't happen. So for someone like myself to put something in place like that, to then not have somebody do it and then say, oh, well, I don't have time for it. Well, guess what? Your marketing director is not going to have time for it. Your person who's in charge of managing, your operations manager, they're not going to have time for it either, because you can just push it to the side. So also would like to say, for anyone who is watching, if you work in an IT department, but you're afraid to speak up of something that's not right, you're not doing that company any good. Like, and it doesn't matter. Like, most people are afraid to be like, oh, I'm going to go speak to the CEO because he's not following this policy or procedure. Follow the proper chain of command, but don't be quiet about it. If they don't answer or respond to it, fix it. Like, that's the only way that it's going to happen. Are they going to probably get mad and upset at you? Yes. Could they potentially make it to where you don't have a job anymore? Sure. But do you really want to work for a place that doesn't have the same core beliefs that you have? So you have to take all of that into account. And if there's just a little more backbone in IT departments when they're speaking to C-suite level people, I wouldn't have a business that I currently have to run and operate. Like, that's my whole thing, is like, and that's why I started my business in the first place, because if you're an internal IT person, that CEO can just blow you off. You're paying me to tell you what to do. And if you don't like that, then you can just stop paying me and I move on with my life, right? It doesn't change one way or the other. But that's super important to have.
Preach it, brother.
Yeah.
I mean, without a doubt, that's spot on. And that's one of the things that in our firm we say too. It's like, we're going to tell you not what you want to hear, but what you need to hear, and hopefully you want to hear what you need to hear. But all that can be really stressful. I mean, and in particular, if you're in IT or information security, cybersecurity, and you're placed in that position, that's one of the many things in our field that can lead to stress. And it's so important that we find a way to deal with that stress in a healthy manner. I often use the word decompress, and there have been times in my career life when maybe I haven't been as healthy in my decompressing activities. So I try to encourage folks to be healthy and positive and productive in what they do. What's one of the things, Jake, that you do to decompress from the stresses of everything technology related?
Sure. So, and we're on the head, right? Burnout happens a lot in the IT space. I mean, all the time. That's why, like, the highest turnover rate for any small to medium-sized business is your IT department, right? It's also not listening to them, but I already touched base on that. But burnout happens because all you do all day long in the IT space is worry about other people's IT protection. Or in the information security space, you're always worried about the next attack, because the one time you're not paying attention is when an attack's going to happen. That's everyone's mentality. But especially for me being in for 15 years, I've realized that if an attack's going to happen, it's going to happen for something that I didn't do while I was working, not something that happened while I wasn't working. So if I focus on and separate both out the work from life, which is very difficult to do in the IT world. I know I'm not a huge proponent sometimes of it, but if you separate out the work from the life, you should be able to be like, okay, everything's perfect at work because I did my job the best that I possibly could. And now it's time to decompress. And I'm a big believer in shutting off all of my devices. I will shut down every single electronic device in my house and build a puzzle. Or I like to go hiking because I live out in the mountains. So those types of things to where it's like, look, if I don't have access to my devices, yeah, that seems like a security risk, but you should have enough faith in that. So decompress, get off the internet. Like, and I don't spend time outside of work anytime on the internet. It sounds like, oh, hey, did you see my Facebook post? Nope, I didn't. It's not something that I focus on. I try to separate myself away from that as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that that's a great thing to do, to just shut down, turn off, and find that balance somewhere else. What future plans can you share with us?
Sure. So I've specifically been focusing a lot on startup venture capital firms. I found recently that 67% of them actually get attacked every single year because they don't put anything in place. So what I've really been focusing on lately is overall security policies, but looking at security policies that some people may not think, right? So if you have a VC, if your company is VC backed, and they get hacked and there's a problem, are they going to inform you that all of your information was leaked? More than likely not. So I've been focusing on, hey, where the money's coming from for the business, how can that be exposed to cause problems for small to medium sized businesses? So that's currently what I got going on, and I got a new book that's supposed to be coming out this year.
Awesome.
Yeah. Right. By the way, fantastic book. I'd like to point out I got one of your early release copies, which I use all the time now. So,
well, thank you for the plug. Along with KnowBe4, I'll send you a check.
right, yeah.
No, that sounds great. I love the direction. I think you're right as far as, like, the venture capital area. Well, Jake, listen, it's been absolutely wonderful having you on. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, to get a hold of your business, what's the best way that they can do that?
Sure, you can go to my website, hireageek.online. You can send me an email, jacob@hireageek.online, or consulting@hireageekonline. You can find me on Facebook as well, and you just have to type literally Hire A Geek Online on any platform, and I'll come up at the top.
You made it easy. That's great. Well, Jake, listen, wonderful having you on. Appreciate you sharing your wit and wisdom for us on this wonderful Tuesday morning.
Thank you so much, Greg. I appreciate it.
And everybody, stay secure.